Leslie, I think it is your turn now. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to let you know a little bit about Wellness Through Mindfulness. We started in 2015, and Dr. Phil Bluestein was the driver behind the program. He has a website called the Breath Project, and on that website you can find many videos and pre-recordings of talks and some written material for mindfulness, all of which is meant to support you with your interest in mindfulness. This evening, Phil is going to give a talk on using the breath for stress relief. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what Phil has to say about that. Phil has been practicing mindfulness for many years, including practicing on longer retreats, and he is a great resource for us here in Calgary. We're very happy to have partnered with Calgary Public Library. This came up as a result of the pandemic when we could no longer meet in person. We were meeting for several years at a community center, and then we took a pause at the beginning of the pandemic and then realized that Zoom was a great way for people to get together under these circumstances. And so we talked with the Calgary Public Library, and Patrick Mealy was our initial contact, and we'd like to thank him for facilitating us running this program in partnership with the Calgary Public Library. And we'd also like to thank Maya Milovic, who has been very helpful supporting us with the technology. And on each time we do this, we come up with some, well, she comes up with some adjustments or improvements. So we're very happy to be working together with her to bring this to you. I'd also like to say a little bit more about Phil. Phil is a gastroenterologist, recently retired, and he is well respected in the medical community. He became inspired to bring mindfulness to the Calgary public because of his experience with helping people with their stomach aches, basically, and finding that many people express their stress through their belly. And he thought that they could be helped by learning about mindfulness and the breath. So this evening, he's going to cover that topic. We will be having another topic at the beginning of April, and I want to tell you what that one is. It is The Power of the Pause with Christine Francoeur. That's on April 1st. And then on April 15th, it's I Rest Meditation for Anxiety with Dr. Paula Fairman. All right, the structure of the program is such that we'll have 50 minutes for the talk, and then we will go to a Q&A, and Phil is very devoted to answering your questions. So we will continue to answer questions as long as there are any questions. The program is intended to end at 8:30, but if there are people who want to stay past the end of the program, we will answer the questions that remain. So I look forward to sharing and enjoying this program with you, and I will be moderating the Q&A, so I'll see you then.
Well, thank you, Leslie, for your kind introduction. And good evening. I'm Phil Bluestein, and I would like to thank you for all joining me this evening for the presentation on breath. And Maya, is it possible for me to be pinned in the middle of the screen, please?
Phil, you are.
What I have is, I have your name in the middle of my screen, Maya.
Okay,
there we go. I'm
got
okay
it now.
Got it.
Okay, got it now.
Good evening. Let's start again. I'm Phil Bluestein, and I'm really happy that you're all here to this evening to hear about this presentation on breath. So we always carry with us the single most effective, practical, and accessible tool for stress relief. We have it with us when we go to bed at night, when we wake up, when we have breakfast, when we go to work, when we drive our cars, when we have sex. And I'm not talking about your smartphones. I'm talking about your breath. We have 25,000 breaths a day. How many of those are you aware of? Breathing is an amazing function. It really has the capacity to be under both conscious and unconscious control. And we're very lucky that we don't have to remember to breathe, or we would all be dead by this point in time. There's a long history of controlled breathing practices for stress relief and for our health. And I want to be very clear that what I'm going to do tonight is talk about the foundational aspects of breathing. I'm not really going to get into alternate breathing techniques such as the Wim Hof, holotropic pranayama, alternate nostril breathing, Buteyko. This is simply what is the effective way to breathe for stress relief and your health. And there are many studies out there that show the benefit of controlled breathing in terms of anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, sleep apnea, asthma, chronic obstructive lung disease, and hypertension. So when you get stressed, what happens to your breath? And most of you would have observed that it becomes fast, shallow. You breathe from your chest and you breathe from your mouth. And really, how effective is that? So what I like to explore today is what I call the ABCDE of breathing. These are the basics that will allow you to hopefully breathe more effectively. There'll be a series of exercises and then questions, and then we'll talk around the particular event. So let's start. I would invite you to sit up in your chair and close your eyes and bring your awareness to your breath. So what do you notice about your breath? Is every breath the same? And what are the qualities of the breath? Is it warm or cold, moist or dry, smooth or irregular? Is it light or heavy? Do you breathe from your nose or your mouth? And do you breathe from your chest or your belly? And now let's bring a particular attention to where you breathe. And I want you to simply notice in this next minute, are you a nose or a mouth breather as you inhale and as you exhale? Just follow your breath and observe. Do you breathe through your nose or do you breathe through your mouth? Now I would invite you to pinch your nose close and breathe in and out only through your mouth. We are only going to practice breathing through our mouth only for this part of the exercise. And now I would invite you to close your mouth and consciously breathe in and out through your nose. So we're only doing nose breathing for this part of the exercise. So you can open your eyes up now. And what did you notice? Was every breath the same, or did each one have unique qualities? And now I'd invite you to go to the chat. So click on the chat at the bottom of your screen. And the first question is, do you breathe predominantly through your nose or your mouth? So enter 1 and just put in nose or mouth. And then the second question is, do you prefer nose or mouth breathing? So put 2 and then your answer. Okay, so when we come into this world, we are predominantly nose breathers. This probably helps support breastfeeding. But over time, actually 30 to 50% of us became mouth breathers. There is a suggestion that the reason we transitioned to mouth breathing over nose breathing was that initially we were hunter-gatherers and we ate wild food. Over time, we became more agrarian farmers, and now ultimately we have evolved, so to speak, into soft processed food. The change in the eating habits has led to changes in our skeletal, facial, and jaw shape. Our faces have become longer. Our noses have become smaller with smaller nostrils, and our mouth has become narrower. And that has resulted in crowding of our teeth and a high arched palate that actually extends up and impinges into our nasal cavity. So these changes have attributed to the shift from nose to mouth breathing. So mouth breathing has its issues. It contributes to snoring, sleep apnea, asthma, bad breath, dry mouth, dental issues. And there's a greater water loss from mouth breathing than there is from nose breathing. The other issue is that we breathe fast and we overbreathe. And so this is really very interesting. One would think that oxygen would determine how much oxygen is released from the blood into the tissue. But in fact, it's carbon dioxide in the blood, in the hemoglobin, that determines release of oxygen into tissue and cells. So that when we mouth breathe, we overbreathe, we drop our carbon dioxide, and this actually inhibits release of oxygen to tissue and cells. Nose breathing has multiple advantages. It warms the air, it humidifies the air, it purifies the air. We have what are called these nasal turbinates. They're sort of bony inlays in our nose that impede the flow of air as we breathe in. And this actually has an advantage. It maintains the elasticity of our lungs and it promotes slow and deep breathing. The other interesting component is that there's a gas called nitric oxide. And this is released from our nose and our nasal sinuses. Now, nitric oxide has some great advantages to it. It allows for dilatation, relaxation of our blood vessels in our lungs that optimizes oxygen exchange. And nitric oxide also has antibacterial and antiviral properties. The other interesting factor is that when we breathe through our nose, there are structures in our nose that are important for how we smell. So simply breathing in through our nose stimulates these structures that directly impact the way our brain works and actually has meditative qualities to it. So the bottom line is nose breathing is preferred to mouth breathing. That whenever we can, we should nose breathe rather than mouth breathe. And as many times throughout the day, one should bring your attention to see, am I breathing through my nose or my mouth? So what was the result of the first question? What percentage of people were nose breathers versus mouth breathers?
Hi, this is Leslie. There was one mouth breather. I didn't count the nose breathers, but there was one mouth breather.
Yeah. And what did people prefer? Well, obviously they preferred the nose breathing, right?
Well,
So,
interestingly, two people preferred the mouth breathing and one preferred mouth and nose at the same time.
okay. So it really is very interesting because the literature would say 30 to 50% of us are mouth breathers. And in our small population, the vast majority of you are nose breathers. So you're already off to the proper start for how to breathe. So that's great news. So first important point, breathe through your nose, not through your mouth. And we can talk about how to support mouth breathing at nighttime at the end as a question. So let's do another experiment. And I would invite you now, again, sit up in your chair, close your eyes, bring your attention to your breathing. Can you hear yourself breathe? Can you actually hear the sounds of your breathing? And we're not asking you to answer any questions at this point. All we're asking you to do is just simply observe your breath. Can you hear yourself breathe? And so the next question is, I would now invite you to breathe in a conscious, deliberate, calm way, such that your breathing is light, smooth, and regular. Breathe so lightly that you cannot hear yourself breathe. Okay, we'll bring this exercise to a close. And now I would invite you to go to the chat. The first question is, do you hear yourself breathing? Answer yes or no. Now, the second question is, when you breathe in a deliberate, conscious, light, smooth manner, do you feel more relaxed? If you could answer this as 2, yes or no. So it's very interesting. We have the capacity to consciously control the way we breathe. Remember in the beginning, we said that we can either breathe consciously or unconsciously, and that we have the ability to deliberately breathe in a way that is calming for ourselves. A calm breath leads to a calm body that leads to a calm mind. Now, light breathing is really quite interestingly. And, you know, I've only recently discovered this aspect of light breathing. This doesn't mean shallow or deep, but it really sort of reflects the amount of air you're breathing in at a time. And when you breathe lightly, it automatically forces you to breathe in a way that is slow and deep. So we can breathe in a calm way to facilitate relaxation. And light breathing is a great way to support a breath that is calm. So that's the second critical point. Breathe calmly and lightly. So let's do another exercise. And invite everybody to sit up in a chair. Oh, no. Sorry. What was the poll? Maya, Leslie, what were the results of the poll?
There were way more yeses than nos, but people kept adding. So I'm not sure if my count is up. It was probably over 20 for the yeses.
So more people heard their breathing than didn't hear their breathing, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and some people said sometimes.
Okay.
Okay.
And what did they prefer? Did they find that they got relaxed when they consciously breathed in a way that made them calmer?
I don't think we.
Yeah, that was the second part of the question.
Yes, and predominantly yes. I have 1, 2 no, 3 no's, 4,
Great.
5 no's in among. I would say this was about 20% to 80. 80 yes, 20% no.
So there's a clear demonstration that we have the capacity to use our breath to calm us down in terms of how we breathe. And when you're breathing at rest, it might be interestingly to experiment with light breathing. Breathing that first, the person beside you couldn't hear you breathe. And second, breathing that you can't hear. Interesting to experiment with. So let's go to the third exercise. And I would invite everybody to, again, sit up in their chair, close their eyes, and bring their attention to their breath. I'd like you to put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And when you take a breath in, is it your chest or your belly that rises? And so at this point, we're just observing. We're not going to type the questions in the chat at this point. Do you breathe from your chest or do you breathe from your belly? And now I would consciously ask you to breathe from your chest only with each inhalation. So you are deliberately trying to breathe as a chest breather, not as a belly breather. And just simply observe, how does that feel for you? And now I would ask you to consciously breathe in a way that your belly rises with each inhalation. So you have a hand on your chest, a hand on your belly, and what you want is to see that only your belly rises with each inhalation. And just observe that. And just see, how does that feel when you are a belly breather? So let's bring this exercise to a close. And I'd invite you now to go to the chat. So the first question for you is this. Are you a chest or a belly breather? Put down 1, chest or belly. And now the second question is, do you feel better when you breathe with your chest or your belly? And so put 2, chest or belly. So as we've discussed, when we're under stress, we tend to breathe from our chest. So is there a problem in breathing from your chest versus your belly? Well, the first thing is this. When we breathe from our chest, we're not really breathing very deeply. And a lot of the air is moving basically through our nose, our trachea, and the bronchi. Now, the bronchi are the tubes that communicate and spread into the lung and finally reach what are called the alveoli. The alveoli are the air sacs that allow for oxygen exchange to occur. So the problem is that there's a lot of breathing going on when we breathe from our chest where there's no air exchange occurring. So we don't oxygenate as well when we breathe from our chest as opposed to our belly. Next, there's a very important muscle called the diaphragm. And the diaphragm separates the chest and the abdomen. So when we inhale, the diaphragm contracts, expands the lungs, creates a negative pressure, air is drawn in. And then when we exhale, the diaphragm rises and expels the air. So diaphragmatic movement is key in how extensive the air that we breathe in is distributed throughout our lungs. So the deeper that we can breathe, we have the greater capacity to oxygenate greater a proportion of our lungs. That the oxygenated air gets into the lower lobes as well. And the predominant amount of blood flow is in the lower lobes. So by breathing deeper, we are supporting oxygen exchange. That's really very important. And the other key thing about the diaphragm is that it interacts in what's called the autonomic nervous system. We're going to hear a lot about this coming up now. And this is the involuntary part of the nervous system that regulates our heart rate, our blood pressure, our digestion. So when our diaphragm moves and contracts, it stimulates what is called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve innervates and controls the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system has the sympathetic, fight or flight, stress, parasympathetic, relaxation response. So whenever we can optimize vagal tone, we stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system that supports relaxation. And that there are more parasympathetic nerve control centers in the lower parts of our lung that get stimulated when we breathe deeper. So diaphragmatic breathing is very important because it, one, optimizes the capacity for us to transfer oxygen into our body. And by stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, it supports relaxation. So for those of us who aren't belly breathers, we can retrain ourselves to become belly breathers. 5 minutes in the morning before you get out of bed, or 5 minutes in the evening before you go to sleep. Put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly, and consciously breathe in a way the hand on your belly rises and not the one on your chest. Or when you're sitting and watching TV, or you're on the phone, there are lots of opportunities to practice, to retrain yourself to be a belly breather. So the third critical point, belly breathing is preferred over chest breathing. So what were the results of the poll? How many people were chest versus belly breathers?
So I have 18 belly, 14 chest, and 2 both.
Okay.
And another question, question 2, 28 belly prefers belly breathing, and 3 prefers chest breathing, and 2 prefers both.
So that's interesting, because it sounds like some of the chest breathers preferred belly breathing when we look at the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's great. And again, there's no question that diaphragmatic deep breathing is preferred. We breathe better and we are relaxed better. So let's go to another exercise, and I would invite everybody to just sit up in their chair, close their eyes, bring their attention to their breath. We're not asking for any response on the chat yet, and we'll let you know when we're going to go to the chat. So what I want you to do is to count your breath and count in seconds how long you breathe in, and count in seconds how long you breathe out. The number of seconds you breathe in and the number of seconds that you breathe out. And now I would invite you to count how long you breathe in for and breathe out 1 second shorter on your exhale. Breathe in and breathe out 1 second shorter on the exhalation. And just observe, how does that feel? And now I would invite you to breathe in, count your seconds, but breathe out 1 second longer when you exhale. So we're breathing out 1 second longer on the exhalation versus the inhalation. And just notice, how does that feel inside of you? So let's stop the exercise, and I'd like you to go to the chat. And so the first question is, do you normally breathe longer with an inhalation or an exhalation? So for question 1, you're going to put in or out. And now the second question is, do you prefer an exhalation that is shorter or longer than the inhalation? So I'd like you to answer short or long. Okay. So again, we come back to that autonomic nervous system that we talked about. We talked about how the diaphragm innervates that parasympathetic nervous system. And we see that again represented in our inhalation and our exhalation. Inhalation is connected to the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, stress response. Exhalation is connected to the parasympathetic system, relaxation response. So it makes sense that if you want to relax, if you want to calm down, you want to emphasize the exhalation over the inhalation. And probably a preferred ratio at rest is 1 to 1.5 inhalation to exhalation. In other words, you probably are breathing out 50% longer with an exhalation than you are with an inhalation. So the fourth critical point, exhalation is preferred over inhalation. So what were the results of the poll?
So in the first one, longer, predominantly longer was out.
Right.
I would say 75% of respondents said longer was out. And in the second one, what do you prefer? Longer exhalation relative to inhalation. And mind you, in the first one, we had 2 people saying it was the same. And the second one, longer, again, predominantly long. So I would say 90%. And the second portion longer. We just basically had just 2 short.
Right. So again, you know, it really does demonstrate, I mean, this is just all physiologic. Exhalation is preferred over inhalation. And unlike our chest mouth breathers, although in our population, there was a predominant of mouth breathers, it's almost inherent that we are going to be breathing out longer than we're going to breathe in. So let's do our last exercise. And this is really sort of brings together it all and really does demonstrate sort of the crux of breathing. So again, I would invite you all to sit up in your chair, close your eyes, bring your awareness to your breath. We don't need any response on the chat at this point. This is purely observation. So I would like you to count your breath, your total breath, from the beginning of inhalation to the end of exhalation in seconds. So we're looking for the average length it takes you to breathe one breath. in seconds, how long does it take you to breathe from the beginning of inhalation to the end of exhalation? And now I would invite you to breathe in for a count of 5 and out for a count of 5. So we're breathing with an equivalent inhalation and exhalation to a count of 5 in and a count of 5 out. And now I would invite you to breathe with an in count of 4 and an out count of 6. In for 4, out for 6. And just observe, how does it feel? Okay, we'll bring this exercise to the close, and I would invite you to go to the chat. So the first question is, on average, how long in seconds does it take for one complete breath? So just enter the number. And then the next question is, do you prefer breathing in for 5 or out for 5, or in for 4 and out for 6? And put your answer down as 55 or 46. Okay, so this is really a very interesting observation that's been made. We breathe on the average 10 to 20 breaths a minute. And the average breath is 3.3 seconds a breath. Now, there is something called slow breathing or paced breathing, PACED breathing. And that is 4 to 10 breaths a minute. And so, Maya, when you calculate the results of the first question, tabulate it as anything less than 10 and anything greater than 10 as a way to subdivide. So, physiologic studies have demonstrated that 6 breaths a minute, a 10-second breath, may be the optimum breathing interval at rest for health. 6 breaths a minute, or 10 seconds a breath. So why is this so good? So there's something called coherent breathing at 6 breaths a minute, where our brain, heart, and lungs have electrical rhythms that tend to be synchronized, interestingly, at this 6 mark. That slow breathing stimulates vagal tone, parasympathetic nervous system relaxation response. That at 6 breaths a minute, there's optimal oxygen exchange because more of those little alveoli, those air sacs, are brought on board. That breathing at 6 breaths a minute improves heart function, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, and it increases something that is called heart rate variability. That's how the interval in milliseconds between each beat may vary. And this is a very interesting reflection of vagal tone. And it also affects us psychologically with less anxiety and depression. So the critical point here is that slow breathing at 6 breaths a minute may be optimum breathing. So Maya, when we looked at the breakdown of slow versus normal breathers, how did it subdivide?
So we had 10 breathers that went above 10 seconds, and we had 17 below 10 seconds.
Wow.
Healthy crew.
Interesting. And then how did the 55-46 break down?
46 predominantly. We have only 155 that I could actually 2, 3, 4. So 4 55s that I could see in the sea of 46. So I would say divided 80 to 20%.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So, the critical point is that slow breathing may be effective, and it sounds like a large percentage of our people already are slow breathing. It was interesting as I went through the literature in that, in some studies, they said 5 in, 5 out was optimum, and it didn't impact whether you had a prolonged exhalation relative to the inhalation. But physiologically, we believe that exhalation promotes parasympathetic drive, that going 4 to 6 is the way to go. And so I guess it's personal preference, but it does seem that more people prefer the 4-6 rather than the 5-5. So in summary, what we're trying to establish here today is the ABCDE of breathing. Bring A, awareness to your breath. Are you breathing through your nose? BC, breathe consciously, breathe calmly in a light, smooth, regular fashion. D, diaphragmatic belly breathing is preferred over chest breathing. E, exhalation is preferred, although we still need to inhale, obviously. And slow breathing or paced breathing at rest at 6 breaths a minute may be the optimum way to breathe. So let's put this all together. I would invite you all again, close your eyes, sit up straight. One hand on your chest, one hand on your belly. Breathe in and out through your nose, and breathe in for 4 and out for 6. Just see how putting all of that together feels. So let's bring that exercise to a close. So we've discussed how we should breathe. The last part is, how can we put this into place? Because controlled breathing can be very effective in the setting of acute stress and to help regulate our nervous system on a chronic basis throughout the day. When you are acutely stressed, your mind shuts down. You can't talk your way out of what's going on, but you can use your breath in the ABCDE way to control your stress and anxiety. So that's the first thing. When you're stressed, go to your breath and take 5. In other words, if you have enough time, breathe like that for 5 minutes. If you don't, how about 5 breaths? If there's no time, 1 breath in for 4 and out for 6. Controlled breathing can also be a practice that you can do on a daily basis. It can be your predominant meditation practice, or it can be the beginning of your practice for 5 minutes and then go into your meditation practice. People talk of a 365 practice. In other words, ABCDE breathing 3 times a day, 6 breaths a minute, 5 minutes at a time. So, breathing is a very effective tool. You can retrain yourself how to breathe effectively. It is essential for dealing with acute stress, and it's a great way to regulate your nervous system on a daily basis. I've listed on the chat, and Maya will now enter it. There are 2 great books, one by Patrick McEwen, who wrote Oxygen Advantage, and James Nestor, who wrote Breath. And both of these are available at the Calgary Public Library. So what we're going to do now is open this up to Q&A. If you have a question, please type it into the chat. If you'd like to ask it verbally yourself, then you can go to participant or reaction and raise your hand, and we can do that as well. So let's open this up to your questions, and I'd be happy to take them. And Leslie is going to moderate the session.
Thank you very much, Phil. I have a question for you as a gastroenterologist. Do breathing problems cause any troubles in the gut?
Well, I think that, you know, the one thing that I've learned in all my years of practice is that one of the biggest factors that influences physical symptoms is stress. And so when we are stressed, we're going to see the irritable bowel and gastrointestinal disease. It's going to aggravate your Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And it has an impact in throughout the system. And there have been studies done where people have done diaphragmatic breathing, looking at irritable bowel, gastroesophageal reflux, and that has been helped. And I did a study with Linda Carlson on mindfulness-based stress reduction, looking at the irritable bowel syndrome and found a benefit. So the bottom line is stress plays such a big role in our physical symptoms. And in whatever way we can release our stress, then physically and emotionally, we will feel better. And I've often said throughout my practice that we have a wonderful medical system, but I'm not so sure about the psychological support. And I think that that needs to be at the forefront of what we are doing. And I think that, you know, this was one of the underlying reasons that I created the Breath Project, as a website where there are animated videos and talks from experts on stress management. There's a book I wrote called Mindfulness Medication, a physician's prescription for stress relief, that is a free download from that website, and why we created Wellness Through Mindfulness as a way to provide free offerings to the public to try and deal with the difficulties of our modern day life.
Thank you. We do have some questions. The first one is, what about pause in breathing?
So, pause is one of those sort of bit of alternate practices. And we have lots of versions of this. We have what is called the box breathing of 4-4-4-4, 4 in, pause for 4, 4 out, pause for 4. Andrew Weil, W-E-I-L, has his 4-7-8 breathing, in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. And there is what's called the Buteyko, B-U-T-E-Y-K-O method, where there is a deliberate pause at the end of exhalation. Buteyko felt that we were over breathing and blowing CO2 off, and we were becoming oversensitized. And so his theory is that we should breathe in and out and then pause and hold the exhalation. And so we can see that there is this great variance between people who recommend a pause at inhalation and people who recommend a pause at exhalation. I never could identify how Andrew Weil or box breathing created the pause at inhalation. Patrick McEwen very eloquently talks about the controlled pause at the end of exhalation. So I think it's something that you might want to experiment if you like. As I said, the main purpose today was to go over the foundations of breathing. And then I think at that point, one extends beyond.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, if you have sleep apnea, can controlled breathing help at all?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have much controlled breathing when we're sleeping. We're pretty asleep. But what has really been demonstrated is that mouth breathing is a big issue with sleep apnea and snoring. And so you may have read a little bit about mouth taping. And I'm only going to, and I'm not an expert, although I have been experimenting with mouth taping in the last while. And I actually, think that it's actually given me a more significant sleep. So I think the bottom line for sleep apnea and snoring is that one should be nose breathing, not mouth breathing. So in preparation, I brought my tape just to show you. So we're not talking about taping your whole mouth up, although perhaps some people in your family might think that might be preferable for you. I'm talking about very small piece of tape. And this is my take on what I've learned from Patrick McEwen. And so basically, all you're really doing is trying to give your mind a little nudge when you're sleeping and unconscious to not be breathing through your mouth. Easy to take off. You're not going to choke on it. Scotch tape doesn't have to be anything more fancy than that. And so mouth taping with just a little bit of tape, and it still adheres to this and this, can be helpful in dealing with sleep apnea and snoring.
Okay. Someone asked, does meditation affect your breathing habits?
Absolutely. Absolutely, in many ways. Because what you're doing is you're bringing awareness to breath, which is probably the first most important factor. Meditation really comes from a Pali word called bhavana, to cultivate. Cultivate what? Awareness. Awareness of what? The present moment. And if you choose breath as your focus, your object, then you're going to bring awareness to your breath, and that's going to impact how you breathe. So that's the first way that meditation affects your breathing. You become way more conscious, way more aware of it. When you meditate and you're sitting in formal meditation, because you're not active, you're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, you are really regulating how you breathe and you're bringing yourself down. And there's one other interesting comment about this. You know, meditation classically is being the witness to your breathing. That conscious control of your breathing is not what is normally recommended. However, conscious controlled breathing for some may be easier. So let's quickly do this exercise. I would invite everybody to sit up straight and close your eyes. And all I want you to do is to bring awareness to the physical sensations of the movement of the breath at the tip of your nostrils. You are just following your breath at the tip of your nostrils. And all I want you to observe, how easy is it to sustain awareness? And now I would invite you to continue to bring awareness of the sensations at the tip of your nose, but I want you to count 4 in, 6 out. So you're observing the movement of the breath at the tip of your nostrils, and you are counting 4 in, 6 out. And how easy is it to sustain awareness? Okay, I'd invite everybody to go back to the chat for 1 second. And the question is this: were you able to sustain awareness better when you were either 1, the witness, or 2, you were counting your breath? So answer witness or count. Maya, what's the breakdown?
So it's almost equal.
Okay.
it really started strong on witness, and then count people started coming in, and I would say that it is almost 50, maybe there is a little bit over to the witness, maybe 60 witness to 40% count.
All right. So this is interesting. Sometimes when we add focal points of concentration, this helps to sustain the concentration. I've modified my meditation practice. I do 5 months, 5 minutes of slow breathing before I meditate now, and then I do my regular meditation. Again, something to experiment. Everything is different. I think the key thing is that you are your own laboratory, that whatever we say makes no difference. It's how you experiment and how you feel. Leslie?
Someone asked if you could go over the 365 once
Sure.
more.
Sure. So this is a nice way to remember it. It's three times a day, 6 breaths a minute, and 5 minutes a day. The bottom line is consistent practice helps.
Okay. If you keep practicing, will this become automatic all the time, or is it something we always need to focus on?
I think we have the capacity to retrain how we breathe. That, again, that hand on your chest, hand on your belly, practicing, you can retrain yourself to become a belly breather rather than a chest breather. And I think that starts to become automatic. I think it's the same that goes with your nose and your mouth breathing, that you can retrain yourself, that, maybe that little bit of tape over your mouth when you go to bed is that silent reminder for your brain that you should breathe through your nose at nighttime. That during the day, whenever you remember, am I breathing through my nose or through my mouth? I think that we get hijacked when stress comes around. Everything goes out the window. We're caught with our thought. And so I do think that initially that requires a more deliberate, consistent practice to go to your breath to stabilize yourself. But again, I have to say that with repeated practice, rather than having it being a conscious thing that you have to think about, it becomes a spontaneous reflex.
When you're in anxiety mode, breathing alone or mindfulness is hard to practice, especially if you are depressed and not functional.
Absolutely. As I said, our minds hijack ourselves. And often talk therapy in the setting of acute stress will not work. There is a gatekeeper in our brain called the thalamus that controls the entry of information to our brain. And it goes offline. It shuts down. So being able to speak about things sometimes may not be effective. Again, I keep coming back to the fact that you have to be your own laboratory. What works for you? And I think that for some, being able to talk to yourself about what's going on and identify what is creating the stress can be helpful. For others, going to the breath can be very effective. For others, going to the body can be very effective because our stress gets reflected in a physical way. And so if we have that capacity to ground ourselves in our body, we can help deal with our stress. There are only 2 things that bring us into the present moment: our breath and our body. So we talked about breath, A, B, C, D, E of breathing. Go to number 1, or consider your body. And in the sense of your body, ground yourself in the parts of your body that are less likely to be stressed. We carry our historic stress predominantly in our face and our torso. Our feet our hands, our buttock tend to be neutral, grounding sites. So when you're stressed, ground yourself in the sensation in your feet, in your buttocks, and your hands. And if you can, then you slowly approach the part of maximum intensity. It could be in your face or your torso. So you're right. When you are caught, it can be very difficult. And there are many techniques, and maybe some of it is just getting up and walking or exercising. But there are lots of things that one can try. And I agree, it can be very difficult.
Can you offer suggestions on how to lengthen the exhalation?
So I think breathing through your nose rather than your mouth is the first thing, because that will force you to begin to breathe diaphragmatically. Breathing lightly will induce you to breathe longer on your exhalations. Slows everything down. And I think counting can be a very effective way to do it. You know, for some people, they're not breathing at 6 breaths a minute. They're breathing at 12, 15, 17 breaths a minute. And so it's unrealistic to expect that you are going to drop from here to here, that it will be a gradual, slow process. And I think the way to start is don't go for 5, don't go for 4. Don't be the yogi and breathe 1 breath a minute. Breathe what is comfortable for you with an in-breath. And then just start by trying to extend that by 1 breath. It feels comfortable. Okay, how about 2 breaths? And then this is a way to slowly cultivate the capacity to breathe longer out.
Another thought would be to add a word. So maybe on the out breath, add ease or relax, which would tend to encourage lengthening.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Does it take a long time to change from chest to automatic belly breathing?
You know, I think, again, everyone is different. I don't think, I think the key thing more than anything else is consistency of practice. That it isn't like anybody can give you a set time, that if you haven't done this in 2 weeks, you're a failure. I believe that if there's consistent practice, there is the capacity to change breathing behavior.
Okay. Here's a bit, someone found a challenge putting 2 things together. How does light breathing square with belly breathing? It seems when I breathe deeply, it's not lightly when belly breathing.
So, and I appreciate this question because I had a little bit of difficulty in understanding the distinction between light breathing and belly breathing. So if I breathe here's what I'd like you to do. I want us just to look at what it's like to almost pant. Just try that for a few breaths. Is that light breathing or is that, what is that? Heavy breathing. But is that deep breathing? Not at all. So light breathing implies the amount of air that you're breathing in at one time. It's the tidal volume, how much air is coming in. So you can breathe slower, and it's just a longer time for that breath to come in and it moves deeper into your system. So I understand that there is a bit of sort of paradox between light and deep, but light facilitates deep because it slows how long you're breathing in, and that forces you to breathe deeper. Do you have any thoughts on that, Leslie?
I think breathing becomes lighter when we have the effect of belly breathing. So if we start to relax with the belly breathing, then the second thing that might happen is that the breathing becomes lighter. They might not happen together, but they
Right.
might happen sequentially.
Yeah.
That's what happens when I meditate. That eventually you can't feel that you're breathing because you get
Yeah.
so much gathering of attention that it seems like you've stopped breathing. I know you're still breathing, but it
Right.
seems like you've stopped breathing.
Yeah. Great.
Someone commented that the whole thing about, I think they're referring to generally doing the preferred breathing is easier in bed than during the daytime, but that they found counting was helpful for them.
Okay.
So I imagine that's to do with the fact that you're actually finally relaxing. There's that first moment when you get into bed that you go, ah, and then, the mind starts going.
Okay.
I think there's a few more here. Someone was appreciative of someone said, I use a metronome for their breathing. They found it very helpful.
And someone just shared with me that on their Apple app, they have a breathing app. And so basically they follow the breathing app, and you can set the length of time in which you breathe in and which you breathe out. And there are lots of breathing apps if you go out there, and these may be a support for you as well.
Okay. Do you recommend transcendental meditation for help on breathing awareness?
So I think that all forms, so transcendental meditation involves using a mantra. And really, meditation, there are so many different varieties of meditation, but in essence, they break down to either focused awareness, where you bring your attention to one specific object, or open monitoring, where your awareness is whatever arises in the moment. I think that all forms of meditation are helpful. And I think that all of them will help your breathing because they bring awareness to your breathing. It's very, very interesting. Mindfulness has something what is called an observer effect. So when you bring focused awareness to something, it changes it. It changes its behavior. And often it tends to slow down. It's almost like it's being witnessed. So I think transcendental meditation, absolutely. If that works for you, perfect.
Okay. Someone brought out a good point about the sense. Can you comment on the experience of feeling like you can't get enough breath or you're running out of breath? What is that?
So this is the exhalation. To clarify, I feel I run out of breath and feel panicky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the end of exhalation. I feel panicky. So, that's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer that one. I think part of the problem is that, when we're running out of breath, I wonder if it really ultimately might reflect how fast our baseline breathing is. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, I know a lot of patients come in and say, I'm having trouble with my breathing. And I'll ask them to say, just what does it feel like? And they say, I can't get enough breath. And I usually know it's anxiety, especially if they're young and healthy,
Right.
because there's that air hunger symptom of I can't get enough breath. There's just not enough breath to get had. Rather than saying I'm short of breath, there's a difference in the way people describe it when it's anxiety. And
Right.
so I think at the end of the breath, there's a natural, like the brainstem tells you it's time to take an in breath. But if you have a baseline level of anxiety, you might experience that as not just I need another breath, but you'll be feeling your anxiety just before the in breath.
Yeah. So in summary, what I like to say is, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody who joined us today for this talk. I really have had a sense that it's very important to talk about breath. Meditation can be difficult. Mindfulness can be difficult. but focusing on your breath, I think, can be a lot easier for some people. And it can be easier than meditating. So remember the A, B, C, D, E of breath. Bring awareness to your breath, breathe through your nose, breathe calmly and lightly, belly breathe, not chest. Emphasize exhalation and consider slow breathing at rest at 6 breaths per minute. Thanks, Leslie, and thank you, Maya, for your help too.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. And we look forward to seeing some of you again on April 1st for Christine Francoeur, The Power of the Pause. And this presentation will be available on our website within a few days.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank to our speakers from Wellness Through Mindfulness group, Leslie and Phil, for another engaging evening. In the age of the pandemic, programs like this bring us relief by not suspending us from reality, but by rooting us in it, by calling our attention to our own breath. And I would also like to thank all of you who joined us this evening for a unique experience where the body and the mind meet to lift the spirit. If you enjoy this experience, you can go to the Calgary Public Library and sign up for the next program in the mindfulness series that's coming up. That's what Leslie has just suggested. So with this in mind, thank you very much again, and I'll see you in April all. Good night.